welcome, colleagues, to the first of our Modernising the Railway Lunch and Learns. The future is here now is a strong statement, but we've got increasing evidence to show that it is. The rail industry has been behind other sectors in modernising in a whole range of ways. And happily, there is some good recent progress to report to you and to engage you with. And this is coming from a range of different parts of the sector, and we'll be covering as many of those as possible in this series of events. So we expect to have an event each month throughout 2022, starting today, and a conference in the middle, whereby you will be exposed to what we think are the key current developments in modernising the railway. We already have a plan for about 8 of those events, and you, our audience, are very important to us, and we will be looking for your input as to what else we should be covering, but more of that later. We'll be tracking you in the best possible sense of the word, and those of you who stay on the journey with us get a badge, and we'll be giving you a CPD statement as well. So to get into today's business, I'm Neil Robertson, Chief Exec of NSAR and Programme Lead for the Living Lab Programme. And I'm going to try and chair our very astute panel today to consider where are we up to with the East Coast Digital Programme. There are a range of ways for you to engage. We would ask that obviously you keep your cameras and sound off, but you can put your hand up electronically, and obviously we'll ask you to put your camera on if you're asking a question, or you can use it, if you're shy, you can use the chat, and we can all see the chat, and I'll try and field the questions, but the panel are free to jump in. So, next slide, please, Emma. I'd like to introduce today's panel to you, and we're very grateful to them for giving their time for this event. So, our initial speaker is Tufik, who, as many of you will know, is the mastermind of the East Coast Digital Programme and has really led it in a very skillful way pretty much from its inception. And Tufik will be saying a few words, and then we'll be bringing in colleagues from different parts of the operation who have made it possible. So we have Mark Fielding-Smith, Paul Boyle and Mark Ferrer, who will all be on the panel, and will all be taking questions from me and from you about how it went. I'm also delighted to report that we've got David Clark, Technical Director at RIA, who together with the team have been pulling together some of the initial findings. And these were emailed to you this morning. And don't worry if you've lost them, because you'll be reminded of them later by David. But David is particularly here to reflect the views of the supply chain and help us think through what does this mean for future suppliers. So that's the plan. So a reminder, you can use the chat or put your hand up electronically. And please feel free to comment as well as ask questions. A ground rule is that this is being recorded, so please bear that in mind in your contributions. Second ground rule is there's no such thing as a daft question. So please, if you're in any doubt, ask, because the purpose of these events is to raise awareness, increase understanding, and broaden the development of the industry. So I'm going to initially turn to Tufik and say, Tufik, you've been our leader of this particular bus, the driver of the bus. Can you tell us in your own words what the journey's been like, what really has struck you about the journey, what's been good, and it's always interesting, what's been less good? Over to Tufik.
Thanks, Neil. Good to join you and colleagues today and talk this. So I remembered recently that it was actually 4 years ago, just about now, when we prepared the first strategy paper for this program, stating that we will be presenting a strategic business case to industry and government in early 2018. And the context of the time was this. In terms of the deployment of what's called digital signalling, the first deployment was in Cambrian, on the Cambrian line in North Wales as a pilot scheme. That was in 2007 to 2010. And from that point on, the industry was struggling to get a viable network plan off the ground. East Coast was the next big thing, and various plans were put in place to try and enable that, but due to its sheer inherent complexity, cutting across every corner of the industry to make it happen, it was aborted twice. We had major fear in the industry and with government of major programs at the time. You had the kind of back end of CP5 and major enhancement overspends, pain with electrification and Great Western. Oh, and this had technology in it. So, fear of major rail enhancement, fear of technology, and it cut across track and train, when at the time this was pre-Williams with franchises on the brink and before the stresses with the Virgin East Coast had fully come to pass. So this was the context within which we were setting this strategy statement in readiness for a strategic business case. So there's lots of fear and anxiety and concern, and frankly, no real faith that this is even plausible, no real understanding on what the point was. There was a real lack of a strategic understanding as to why, and given the challenges of before attempts, it was seen as almost implausible. So the way we approached this was fundamentally from first principles, and that was to say, how would you do such a thing? If you removed all that baggage and the structures and the pains that we had within the industry, how would you do such a thing? And a few principles became very clear and fundamental to how to go about this. And they were as follows. One was that this was fundamentally changing the way we operate the railway, and therefore had to be organized in such a way that all the key entities that ran the railway today, that would be running the railway tomorrow, were embedded in this enterprise. And in fact, the program or the activity itself was very transient, and its core purpose was to enable that group of folks to go from running the railway today in that form to running the railway tomorrow or in the future in a different form. And that required a deep partnership, given not just industry structures, because even with reform, the industry is still very complex. And even if you folded the entire industry into one organization, it would be so large and so complicated that the sub-entities of it that would need to be pulled together would still require such an approach, regardless of whether it was overseen by a legal entity. And anyone who works currently or has worked for a large organization would attest to that. You have different parts of your own organization that you might struggle to engage or align with or pull together in the same direction. So that was one fundamental. The others were user-centricity was crucial to this. There is a real lack of appreciation of that in industrial engineering and in the rail industry. But if you look at the commercial software world where technology is deployed, the user is central to the design and implementation of that technology. And when I say implementation design, it's not just the technical design, but the process design, the change design, everything, the cultural design of how that works is deeply embedded. And anyone who's used a technology that seemed very intuitive, the scale of intellectual effort that went into making that technology intuitive was immense, and it wasn't a product of chance. So user centricity was crucial. It had to be a change program. It was designed as a change program, something we don't do in the industry, rather than just a technology infrastructure project that then tells everyone to kind of keep up with the change. And it also required a different way of engaging with suppliers, where we wanted to bring the great depth of value that suppliers had to offer really close to the user community, and take away what I had seen in my career, this kind of chasm of project administrators that sit between the folks who inherit the outcome of that change and the people actually delivering it, which just creates more ambiguity and effectiveness and confusion. So those became kind of founding principles amongst a few other things, but we designed the whole enterprise in that way. And core to that was also a level of agility to evolve. It was seen as though it was its own enterprise, its own business. It was almost irrespective of which organization was leading it. And like a startup organization, it had to evolve as it grew and as it found new things. We were never going to design this in a workshop on day one and it was going to just manifest perfectly. We had to keep testing and evolving ideas by applying them, by making them real, doing things, but then being very able and quick to respond to those and to evolve and adapt. And when we go to where we are now, it has fundamentally worked. Over the last 18 months, 2 years, as we've mobilized the program and an immense amount of funding out of the outline business case stage with government, which took an immense campaign to get industry and government to a place where this was understood and supported and seen for what it was. We've mobilized an industry program for the first time, the first of its kind, built a unique culture around that, deeply embedded open boundary working to really bring the best that the various organizations have to offer to this, created a migration plan for a migration to a new state of operation using digital signaling, which is immensely complex, touches every corner of the industry. And off the back of that, built a bottom-up industry plan, which has formed our full business case and the implementation plan that we are now moving forward with. The first time something like that has been done. This isn't a program plan, it's not a network rail plan. It's been built together by the industry entities, suppliers, the operators, the route that contribute to this program. So it's fundamentally working, and we see the depth of profound effect that this way of working has had to overcome the inherent complexities of something like this, which is truly so complex because of how much it touches every aspect of the industry structurally. We have, just to migrate the first phase on East Coast, we have to migrate 3,000 drivers into a new state of operation. Hundreds and hundreds of trains need to be ready, and it affects close to 30 different organizations across the industry, duty holder organizations. So it's an immense endeavor. And what it's allowed us to do is to overcome the inherent complexity of that, so that we can pull together as best as possible the right talents, the right people from those various organizations to focus on the real problems, the real challenges of making this real, rather than what tends to happen with something that's so inherently complex, to be so overcome by the organizational fog and mess and complexity of something like this that we never make the progress that's intended. And just a brief anecdote before I close. The other day, Paul, who head of the LTMS from LNER and leads with his immense experience and passion the industry change side of the program, which brings together all the various change leads that we've mobilized from the various organizations across the operating environments that have to then implement this change to operate in digital signaling. I joined him, and the first time they've assembled full kind of cohort of change leads from the various organizations for an event and a dinner last week. And despite having worked together to create this as it is, this is exactly what we intended and exactly what we wanted. Despite that image and that aspiration, I was still absolutely blown away by the depth of experience, passion, and collaboration that's been established across the industry. I was looking across a room of about 70 people, from every corner of the industry, roles deeply steeped in the operational reality of the railway, former drivers, former signalers, operation managers, all have been with experience of having worked for different organizations. A signaler now working for a freight company, and someone engineering standards now working in the route, and so on, with a sense of passion for the legacy that this has to leave, working together in a way that's never been seen before. I mean, saying that we were looking at a room of kind of GBR in the making, I think is even an understatement, because even GBR doesn't fully encompass everything that we've seen in that room and we're trying to pull together. And none of that takes away from the fact that there's still complexity and commercial challenges and structural challenges. But the way we overcome those is by enabling people as best as possible to transcend those, because those will never be perfect. And even if there was an agenda to try and make them so, they will still have problems. However you cut this, you create an interface somewhere, you create a structural challenge somewhere. So it relies on people to truly overcome that. And the overarching lessons from this that we've tried to share with David, Carl, and team at RIA, as we kind of turn a page into a new phase, and try and capture the essence of the experience so far so that it is transferable, is that fundamentality really matters. You've got to really understand what the nature of the enterprise is, how you go about it, and then figure out how the structures that you have around you need to be either overcome or levered to support. Open boundary working is really difficult, and people find that culturally difficult, but is actually fundamental and is a way of growing creativity, talent, and creating incredibly multi-organizational, multifunctional, very powerful teams. User-centricity is going to be more and more at the forefront of what we do. We talk about it as putting passengers first, but it's beyond just kind of stating the passenger or a user every so often in a paragraph as kind of a nod to the fact that we recognize as a customer in the process. It's actually putting the user experience at the center of our design thinking. And there are a few other points that will come out, but lastly I'd say is that it really requires a tenacity and agility to adapt and change. Nothing we've done has stayed static, and it's required adaptation throughout. So many things we've attempted didn't work. So we could have said, that hasn't worked, that was a failure, isn't it all horrendous? But instead we got together and said, that hasn't worked, how do we make that different? Especially where it crosses boundaries. Something we wanted to do with a supplier hasn't worked. Very, very easy to fall back into, oh, well, you see, we knew suppliers were never going to be able to do something. Whereas we got together and said, so how do we make this work? What are we exposing in that reality? And it's that agility that allows an idea to kind of manifest in the real world, which really underpins the whole entrepreneurial process.
Terrific, thank you. And many congratulations to you and the team. And it sounds very much like a team effort to me for what you've achieved so far, and for the hurdles you've had to overcome and the boundaries you've had to break and remake. So big congratulations. I'd now like to get under the skin of this, because I have a hunch that, if this was a horse race, this is probably not the favorite, but it's the one that I think is going to win. So it's probably a 6-1 outsider, but I think this one will be the race winner. So that's my hunch. But I want to test that a bit with you all and look at, under the skin of that, there were lots of specifics around processes, people, money, etc. So if I can start with Paul. Paul, we're creating a whole new body to try and help with what Tufik described as cutting across track and train. Yeah. Now let's be old world for the moment and call you the representative of the train. How did this feel from your perspective? What did you have the same kind of challenges internally that Tufik is very tactfully describing? What did the drivers say about it? some of those kind of questions. How did it feel for you?
Yeah, I think you know, for us at LNER, but also personally, one of the things, as Tufik mentioned, we've been on this journey for a while on East Coast, so we've seen the the outline plans and the delivery that was attempted. But one of the things that we did very early on at when we were East Coast, and it was probably back in 2011, 2012 when we were first starting to shape up to can we change the East Coast Main Line to digital signalling. We started to develop and educate the business back then, and we started to seek good practice, what good looked like around the world in this space. And from that point onwards, what we really have been blessed with is the mandate from the boards and directors that have looked after the East Coast Main Line franchise, whether it be Virgin Trains and now LNER, that there's a deep-rooted understanding of the benefits that this systems and the systems that come from that, how they transform the product for the customer. And that's everything from information, the detailed plans that you can create, the fidelity of the train plan that you can create to the second scheduling, and the dynamics of the way the East Coast Main Line works. So we saw something in the system that would unlock the real potential, and obviously things such as the investment made in the trains and the new trains for East Coast, with new speed capabilities. We've always understood to get above 125 you need to have in-cab signalling, you need to have robust train protection. So these are things that start to unlock benefits for the customer. That is right at the heart of the belief in the system, but also the understanding of what it could do to the East Coast Main Line and our operation.
Thanks, Paul. I mean, it sounds to me that you've had to persuade a lot of people to stick with this.
Yeah, I think, and it's inevitably, you do get that. There's the lack of understanding of how it can be applied was a real challenge, and we've been through that for a number of years. And one of the best ways that we've found to have been able to demonstrate it is to do some show and tell, and things like the simulator that we updated that back in 2015. And of course, it wasn't really to start the train in anger. It was to start to develop understanding and intelligence in the business, but also within the wider communities as well. So that's been an important tool to use, which is really outside of any training and competence structure that you normally would use simulators for. But
it's making it real for people, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I don't know if you've been called a salesman before, but I suspect you're a very good salesman. And Paul, when you were trying to persuade your more difficult internal stakeholders, we don't need to know their names, but they might be finance directors, perhaps. But anyway, let's not use any names. What of the range of benefits you've described there, which all make sense to me, and I'm sure the audience, which benefit was the most pressing or powerful in that communication?
Yeah, I think one of the key things that we did, and we've done over the years with this, is to draw out the operating reality of today. And actually, when you start to scratch below the surface, there's limited understanding of what the actual operating reality is, and what we actually use day in, day out in the system. And the variance that we've got in current signalling systems and the limitations in the current signalling systems, the way that we apply a lot of human intervention into things like how speed restrictions are managed, but also the risks that currently sit within them systems as well. And we get really good performance in these areas, and we run a safe railway. But there's limitations. And so what we really did was draw some of them limitations out, make them visible, and then show what is the reality of the alternative and what the future signalling can bring. And by doing that sort of just that dynamic, everybody understands. If you say, right, when you have a track circuit failure, this is what happens. And this is what it looks like in digital. So everyone's experienced them things. And that really, whether it be, train drivers, signalers, operations managers, financial directors, they all get that. And they see them, the things that we face day in, day out, and the challenges of just some of that reality. One of the numbers I always use is sub-threshold minutes. They're the big untapped problem with why we can't run a right time railway. And as a business, we typically see 30 to 40,000 for our 155 trains a day. Every period we see that, and they are totally unaccounted for minutes, and they're all made up of the noise that is the railway that is running to the 1 minute and 2 minute offsets. And that's the problem that we can address that head on and make a difference.
And that, Paul, that wasn't quite what I expected, but I think is particularly powerful, because what you used, you communicated to people who thought they knew the system what was really happening underneath it. So actually, instead of saying, "Oh, we've got something now, but it could be better," you really said is, let's understand much more deeply what we really have got just now, and actually how, not bad, but how inefficient it is, and how reliant on many moving parts.
Absolutely, and the consistency, the lack of consistency.
You've gone on mute.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, the lack of consistency as well, Neil, that we see, that we don't really understand, because again, another thing, and Tufik might like to touch on some of this, because we did quite a bit of work in the FBC, but actually the data on which the system in the UK is based on is very fragile. It's not complete, and what we will create from what we're doing on the East Coast is a new baseline for that, and that will again be a springboard. The way that outside of East Coast can actually then be used to better effect in the wider applications.
And there's financial as well as passenger benefits to that as well.
Absolutely.
Well, we'll come back to that. Thank you, meanwhile. Mark Fielding-Smith. So you are the Digital Rail National Services Director at Atkins. You're therefore a hard-nosed guy, right? We know that already. Tough, hard-nosed, pushy supply chain, commercial, just trying to squeeze as much cash as you can out of those innocent people at Network Rail, pull the wool over their eyes. That's the stereotype, isn't it? But that's not what I'm hearing from Tufik. I'm hearing partnership, right? And there's something called the Rail Sector Deal. And in that's a partnership between industry and government, all parts of industry and government, where we're trying to really build a different kind of partnership. Or perhaps, I don't think we're as good as you guys are at doing it, but we're trying to address some of these issues. So, Mark, how did it feel from your side? Who did you have to persuade? Because Tufik told us you were flexible, right? Now, and I believe Tufik. So therefore, thank you for being flexible. You probably had to persuade people, or is everyone frightened of you and you don't need to persuade them?
Not so lucky, I'm afraid, Neil. I think, the journey many of us have been on, and that, I think one of our values on the program is tenacity, and there are people here that have been doing this since last millennium. As many people have heard me say before, I was on West Coast Main Line, so the drive to roll out ETCS is strong in many people across this program, and I think that's what's exciting about the current state in UK, this particular program, is there is a real alignment right across industry with huge support. So, you know, internally within Atkins, it was a no-brainer. Phil Hoare had helped bring industry together to do the rail sector deal. And I was part of that digital pillar, working with David Clark and others on this call. So, you know, on a personal level, I would say it's a personal mission. So I'm very much on board. So hopefully I was the right sort of person to help TUFIC in the program. So, you know, that's the essence of it. So the persuasion in Atkins was fairly straightforward, because our vice president had already committed that this is what we were going to do.
Well, you've got a very enlightened leader there, Mark, and you know, I watched Philip yesterday at the Rail Sector Deal Council, and you know, he is enlightened and gets all of this stuff. But standing back from it, what's in this for Atkins? You know, more generally, what's in it for Atkins?
So I think it's the same. Well, there's distributed benefits right across industry for this. We want to be, as I'm sure Mark will say, and anybody related with signaling, we want to be involved in moving forward to digital signaling. We can see all the benefits. That's what we want to do with our careers. We want to move it forward. We want to help everyone work together in a way that, frankly, hasn't been done before. And I think, you know, my background goes back to systems engineering. West Coast Mainline, delivered it in Holland on a greenfield site, which is much easier. Much easier. I'm not saying HS2 is going to be easy, but it'll be
You better not say that, Mark, because you'll.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the point is, doing it on a brownfield complex railway is what we learned a couple of decades ago. It's difficult. And I think what TUFIC and the team did, because to be clear, Mark Ferrer and myself, our organisations joined along this journey, is set the foundations right for that collaboration. Because I've seen, you know, we had joint project teams on West Coast Mainline and so on, but it wasn't quite the same thing. So what we're seeing, and I think Rail Sector Deal helped with it. I think it helps form that industry collaboration, that one mind, that moving in the same direction, beyond the train or get left behind. But that, you know, that pervades in everything that we see from executive level on the industry steering board all the way through to working level. Now, I'm not saying that everyone in the world is convinced about moving from conventional to ETCS, right? That is still an ongoing job. You used the word salesman earlier. I'll go a stage further and say war bond salesman. There is a real need to keep highlighting the very genuine benefits of this. And cost, you know, was a major focus of Rail Sector Deal. Incredibly compelling, 66% of the railway needing to be re-signalled in 15 years. We've heard John Larkinson say on stage, we've heard everyone, I think we've heard the Secretary of State saying, post that on television talking about it. So all the cost savings are there, the agility, the carbon benefits. You know, as we've worked through the business case, the carbon benefits was an absolute delight to upturn numbers in the high 30% of locked-in carbon savings, because of course you're not putting as many gantries out and putting the lights up. So the benefits to some degree, when we joined, we knew that the benefits case is a bit like an iceberg. You show the people what's above the waterline with where the focus is today, but actually there's a tremendous amount of benefits that you're not showing off about on a daily basis. What you need is a joined up industry team that know all of them and effectively push the graphic equalizer up depending on the timing and the needs. We're delivering all those benefits, but actually the headline ones are significant and enough. I mean, the capex saving it in itself makes this compelling on a national scale. But I think what's really interesting, and the thing I'm really delighted about, is this program's seeding and cascading a lot of the train fitment, which will make this easier for long-term deployment plan as ETCS rolls out across the rest of the country. And people like Paul are seeding that knowledge from TOC to TOC. The Fox are sharing all of their experience, simulators, all of the thinking. And it really does feel like a collective industry push. Still people not on the train, and it's all of our collective job to keep moving forwards. I think that for me is what's different about ECDP. I am lucky enough to interview the execs for the industry steering board regularly for feedback as part of relationship management. And I just can't tell you without sounding like I've had too much caffeine about how positive everyone is about this. And I'm sure Tufik would be itching to tell you that we did extremely well on the first pass of the business case with IPA recently, and itself was unprecedented. The level of support is really there everywhere we look.
Great, Mark, thank you. And you're right to talk about benefits, and that's going to be a theme of all of these workshops, the benefits pyramid that you described. And we've started in a good place. And many of the benefits won't be in CapEx. There will be more CapEx spent to save OpEx, which is not an equation we're particularly good at in the railway, particularly when you factor in passengers as well. So, and this is actually one of the biggest challenges for GBR, is to get that whole equation much better, and you're showing the way. But
I think the other thing there, Neil, is the distributed benefits for each stakeholder. That's the other thing that we're not tremendously good at, is making sure that everyone understands the benefits they individually get across a dispersed stakeholder business case. So
Mark, you went a wee bit quiet there. Could you say again what the other benefit was there, or the other point was?
Sorry, probably Wi-Fi. I was saying the other challenge is distributed business cases, where there are benefits for multiple stakeholders.
Yeah.
And as Tufik said, that this is one of the trailblazers for GBR, it genuinely is in that case, because this is an industry business case with industry benefits. So that's the other subtlety.
Yes. So each player can see their benefit within the pyramid.
Yeah. But sorry, very final thing to that. That is the measure of the collaboration.
Yeah.
Of course, is when we start compromising to achieve the end goal. And we have seen plenty of that. And Mark may mention it on tranche one, maybe setting him up a bit there. There has been tremendous movement, compromise, and flexibility from the partners to ensure we get there.
Thank you, Mark. Well, this sounds almost too good to be true, but if anybody is a tough, cynical, hard-bitten individual, it's Mark Ferrer, who's digital director at Siemens Mobility. So, if he tells us it's true, I might start to believe it. Mark, I know Tufik's got a black belt in karate and has been twisting your arm hard for a long number of years now. But really, I don't see any arm up your back at the moment. What's your take on this?
Yeah, it's it is brilliant. The reason being, we work in an industry. Our industry is associated with moving goods and people around the country on rail, and the way in which we control those trains, it hasn't changed for decades. We've tinkered with some of the technologies that we use, but the principle of what we do and the benefits of what we do haven't changed. And by having the vision to get to the end game that we're aiming at, in terms of having in-cab signaling, much safer continual train control, the ability to increase the passenger experience with more reliability of systems, the ability to have more robust timetabling so we can get more accurate prediction of train performance and train movement. We all know that's where we're trying to aim for. It's our industry, and what we want it to be the best that we can make it. And we all know, I think the whole industry knows, we can do better than we have been doing for the last number of years, or for the last number of decades. And the introduction of these sorts of technologies brings about that benefit. It brings it about. But as we always say, this isn't a technology project. This is a business change project that's enabled by technology. So there's no point having all that technology exists, you know, the ability to run trains with a radio-based train control system and traffic management and all of that. It all exists, it's all there, it's all totally doable, but it's of absolutely no point if the user adoption of it is not there.
Yeah.
So the way in which you almost have a marriage of the technology with the user adoption of that technology, and then equally the ability for the user of the technology to define what the technology is going to do, such that when the two actually come together in the real railway, you know, what we've got is we've got a good scenario. I won't say it's a perfect scenario, because there will always be something that you go, well, we could have made that better. But that again is one of the benefits of the way in which we are set up on this program. We're set up that we've got a tranche that is specifically focused on enhancing whatever we've done. Yeah, so we've got the ability to then go back and enhance it and tune it and make it absolutely the best that we can make it. But we're not going to get there in one step. And I think the maturity of the program allows us to understand that we're not going to get there in one step. We're going to get there. We're going to take one step. We're going to take a big step. Then we're going to take another step, and then we're going to tune it. And we're going to have, you know, what we're going to end up with is a brilliant train control system that sets then the path and the objective for what we then can go and do across the rest of the country, and we can then have the best railway network across the whole country. You know, and from a global perspective, we've seen it on other previous programs, when we've done things for the first time, or we've done things that are a little bit more complicated than the average. The rest of the world watches. They watch exactly what we're doing, and they learn the lessons from what we do, and then they go and they specify that as a capability that they want in their countries.
Let's hope they're doing that, Mark, anyway. So a couple of annoying further questions from me, and then we'll open it up to the panel. And I'm hoping that the audience will have some questions as well. And I'm going to bring in David to highlight some of the sort of more general findings. But Mark, two questions. First is, did you make any money off of this?
Yeah, so the issue is the sustainability. So, you know, we know that the railways are expensive. We know that the government are looking to increase efficiencies in the railway. For our business, you know, if we look at our business in the UK, for our business in the UK to be sustainable, the industry needs to be sustainable. Therefore, we've got to fight for every efficiency that we can get. Equally, businesses have got to be sustainable. You know, so it's nobody can do things for free. We've all got bills to pay. We've all got salaries to pay, etc. So yeah, there's already you know, the defined outcomes are already there. So it really, the focus, I would say, is around ensuring that we've got the sustainability in the business, in the industry, to be able to keep doing this. Yeah, keep rolling out that railway.
You should be a politician. That was a very Mandarin answer to an annoying question. I'm expecting a less political answer to the next one, but what I think I'm going to take from what you've just said is actually a more strategic point, and you're clearly a strategic thinker. And this is a point that I make to other colleagues often, and some agree with me and some don't, which is it's the wider investment in the industry. Unless we reduce unit costs, it just won't come. So in a sense, from taking just crass commercial point of view, for there to be a signalling market in the UK, there has to be investment in signalling, and that won't come unless we reduce the unit costs. And I'm sure David will say something about that later. So that's why one of the things I took from your excellent comments. Just for an aside now, and you'll forgive me for this because of my day job at MSAR, is the people that were fitting it and the training and development of those people, your workforce, How did that go? Did you have to do a lot of investment in development to get them to where they needed to get?
So I guess you know that's a great question, and what I would say is that training is something that never stops. So you don't go onto a sheep dip, go through the sheep dip, and then come out the other side, and that's you fully trained and fully competent. It's an ongoing process. What we found is that provided that if we just talk about train control, if we talk about signaling, the principles, as one of my great colleagues says, the principles of signaling are relatively simple. You know, don't let the trains fall off the track, don't let them hit each other. That's it. And the way in which we do that, fundamentally, the principles that sit behind it are the same. The principles that sit behind it, the way in which we achieve those principles is completely different. So by taking somebody who is already a trained and competent signaling engineer and giving them the ability and the tools to then be able to apply that theory and that principle just in a different way, by using a different tool set, by using a different set of processes, actually it's not the greatest leap in the world. You know, people, you may think it's a totally fundamentally different leap in terms of capability. Actually, it's not, because the end objective is the same. We need a safe railway where trains are kept apart from each other and they don't come off the track at points and crossings.
How long did that training take, Mark? Very, very roughly, because that was encouraging to say it was an incremental step, not a transformation, a total reskilling. Roughly, how long did it take to get people ready?
So we're kind of going through it at the moment as we go. You know, you need something in which to use your training skill on. So we're going through it at the moment. We had an initial training course of I think it was probably about 2 weeks to give the basic skills and the context of this is what this means and that's what that means and this relates to that, etc., etc. And then you get into the program and start to use that skill on a delivery project. So you know, we've got the Northern City Line. Mark had mentioned the NCL Northern City Line. It's the first deployment that we're doing as part of the East Coast program. What we did is we put some guys through some you know, base training. They're already competent, capable engineers. But put them through some base training and, you know, got them into the NCL program. I would guess the point that was quite important around the NCL program, actually, and it comes back to something that Paul Boyle mentioned earlier about there being a limited understanding of the real operation of the railway. Mm-hmm. Those that are in the real operation of the railway probably have a very deep and detailed understanding of how that railway operates. But as signaling engineers and people who deliver programs, I would say that, you know, I for 32 years I've been on the railways in signaling projects, and I thought I had a really deep and detailed understanding of the operation of the railway, right up until the point at which I became involved in East Coast Digital Program, and I was then, because of the model that we've got and the way in which we're working, I was then put in an environment where I'm dealing day in, day out with people who really do operate the railway, who really do get how it works. And you realise that there's quite a large gap between what you think you know and what you actually need to know, and what, you know, how things actually work. There's a massive gap, and when you break that gap down, and you look at some of the programs that we've done under traditional models that have probably been less successful, you can probably attribute the failures to that gap in knowledge of everyone thinks they're an expert. The reality is that there's a huge delta.
Really important. Thanks, Mark. It's a really important point. There was a famous person in history called Socrates who said he was pretty wise. And not the footballer, this is a philosopher. And he said the wisest person is the person that knows that he doesn't know everything. And that's just what you're saying. And it's what Paul said as well, is that there's so many moving parts. But Truffitt used the words, the sheer inherent complexity And I think you've both just illustrated it.
And
Now,
if I can say, sorry, Neil, if we can say, just coming back to the training part,
yeah,
you know, how do
I
we
wondered
do the
if you'd
training?
come back to that.
The technical training, it's almost, you know, it's almost a binary function. It's a mechanism. The real training is the learning that fills the gap between you know, the base understanding that you've got and the real operation of the railway. And
Yes.
that's where this user-centricity pillar really comes into play.
And that's not going to be easy for us as we train the next generation of colleagues who's going to be fitting and optimizing this stuff. That's not going to be easy, is it? But let's not get depressed. Paul, you ducked the question earlier. I noticed it, and don't think I didn't notice it, about the drivers and what the drivers made of it, because they're a very important stakeholder group for us. And what was their take on this?
Yes, so the drivers, you know, I would say there's a mixed reaction.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is just down to, again, the exposure, the understanding of the system. So certainly we've done work with ASLEF in this space. You know, ASLEF have a working group set up which is specialising in ERTMS, and I've been meeting with them for probably 2-3 years now. We've made sure that they've been exposed to operation on the Cambrian, so they've been over and drove on the Cambrian, and we obviously get them involved in you know, development of things like the simulations, all of them things. So again, it's about really starting to you know, demystify the system for the users. And what we're finding is once they see it, they use it and have more understanding, they really get it and they want them to use it more. They see it as an additional skill, which it is.
Yeah.
And it's one of the, you know, additional tools that they've then got in their kit bag. One of the things that certainly the drivers want is a consistent application. And that is one of the things that, you know, as Mark touches on, where we're bringing the ops concepts to life. You've got generic applications of the system, but then the specifics, and that's really where the, you know, the key training lies in the specific application, how it will affect the reality.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so it's you know, one of the other things that we're deploying as part of the business readiness plans is like a principle of like super users, where you get some early adopters, advocates. That's something that we borrowed from, you know, the colleagues in Austria. That's what they did. They had, you know, a method of super users who became skilled. They then would be, you know, an advocate at the depot. So an example that we've got of that, each of our depots, we've got Edinburgh, Newcastle, Leeds, and Doncaster and London. Each of them has got a super user driver identified. They've been to the Cambrian. They've, you know, we pre-lockdown, we were expecting to take them to Spain. We had that lined up to experience it. And again, it's about just really starting to, you know, people see it in its use, and then they relate to it and they go, ah, yes, that will make a difference here. And you know, the more you can do that, obviously we've got Crossrail now, we've got Thameslink, we've got Tranche 1 coming through, and we're drawn on a lot of that back into the community from the experience that, you know, for example, GTR have had in their deployments to date, and obviously they're going to be the lead operator for Tranche 1 area, and we bring all them lessons together. Things like training product development, we've done that to a version 1 of a generic material that's been produced cross-industry, and we've used, again, we've got that to a level now which can be built on, and it will become more specific to the tranches to support East Coast. But yeah, very much, you know, on the journey. One of the things that we have found, and this is a reflection from like LNER really, Cambrian lost four out of their 40 drivers who didn't really want to you know, to do the change with ETCS.
Yeah.
We thought we would see something quite similar with the Zoomer, It's a very technical train. Massive change from the 30, 40-year-old Mark IV and HST. We didn't see that, and there was an appetite, and some of the things that we've been on over perhaps the last 10 years, and it's things like introduction of iPads. Our drivers use the TAS system, and so you're starting already to introduce technology, and drivers then losing the fears of it in some respects. And that's, again, one of the observations, like if we can take people on the journey more, I think the fear factor, the acceptance is a lot stronger. And of course, the other thing that underpins is the safety is obviously, it helps, when you bring to life some of the reality of some of the incidents that we have, the near misses that we have, and people see that, human beings, the best human beings can have failure points, and that's reality, really.
It is, yeah. No, I think we're going to have a question on that in a minute. Those drivers must have been disappointed to get to go to the Cambrian line, but not to Spain. But anyway, that's life.
That's it. It was it. We did have we had one of the lead union reps there probably 4 or 5 years ago now, and it was to try and broaden it a bit. But we've COVID put an end to that, unfortunately. But for the time being.
So I'm going to ask the panel to look at the question. I'm also going to ask Tufik just to say something about the theme there of communication. So Tufik, a minute on what your colleagues have said on communication, if I may ask you to do that. And then I'm going to look in the chat, the panel, and see who wants to take on a really interesting question from Malcolm. So Tufik.
So the overriding thing that's coming across, we've gone into some of the technical elements of delivering this as ETCS, say, or digital signaling and the migration of it. But really what's underpinning that is kind of some really foundational ideas, which is how do you make the objective of what's being pursued really clear? And lots of change enterprises really suffer from not making that clear. I mean, you can go as far as something like Crossrail, which is pretty obvious, but you can go to the depths of some of the teams on Crossrail sometimes and find that people are embroiled in problems and can't raise their head to the scale of the mission that they have and how to kind of transcend those problems because of it. So absolute clarity over the objective. We made it very clear that the mission was to create the next generation railway. It wasn't to do a bit of ETCS somewhere. It is to set the mold for how the railway can be different in the way it's operated, the way it's delivered, the way it's organized, the benefits it generates, the options it creates, and so on. And then to do that, it was fundamental to link the user environment with the delivering environment. And that's how we've organized this whole thing. But the tenacity required to make that real is very deep, because what I just stated might feel obvious, but is very, very hard to implement in the realities of a human, fallible, structured, commercial, multi-organizational environment. And therefore, it's easy to kind of extrapolate from that the fundamentality of good, solid, robust, clear communication. But really what underpins that is sincerity, clarity of mission, depth of working with people, focusing on the real issues, empowerment, enablement, organizing in the best way possible, stripping out complexity. And despite everything I've said, we've still got so much to go for. We're constantly looking at how do we make it simpler, because there's enough real stuff to overcome than to have the kind of fog challenges that we face. In terms of, I might tackle that really quickly just to save us some time, and then we can go to something else. And it was about the performance of drivers. We've modeled and seen and know that the way we model and simulate drivers is not close enough to the reality. And we've shown that even in simulation, getting some really experienced drivers and seeing how they drive. And that's because there's a wide tolerance in what's called multi-aspect signaling to the signal. If you're looking out the window in different weather conditions, you get different outcomes. Different drivers respond to the first non-green signal, the double yellow or yellow, slightly differently. There are driving practices. These all rely on human judgment. In ETCS, while there's still a driver, the fact the speed is supervised, controlled, and you can't overspeed means the drivers can drive to the speed curve of the train and the capability of the train. And from what we know, it generates a much more consistent, if you graph the speed curves, they're all overlaid on each other. Whereas in conventional multi-aspect, when you overlay speed curves, you find there's a very broad tolerance where one driver brakes much earlier, one further out, in different shapes and so on. So it means you can operate a much tighter tolerance railway, which is what Paul refers to in terms of sub-threshold minutes, all that kind of noise that gets lost in the performance.
Yeah. Okay, no, terrific, thank you. And actually, Malcolm is building on that question, so you can perhaps see the question in the chat. It looks a really challenging and good question to me. And Malcolm, thanks for popping your camera on as well. Who wants to take on Malcolm's question to start with?
That was my attempt.
You were dealing with that. So in a sense, what you're saying is that the technology is helping with the variation in performance between drivers, and then something about the simulation not being as good as we would have liked it. And we've learned, like Mark, we've learned how that actually we didn't know the gaps between the reality and the simulation. Probably the drivers did, but maybe not others. Yeah. And Malcolm, was that help? Sorry, Paul.
Thank you. I was going to just add that a lot has been made in the recent IRP of the capacity that's going to be required of the East Coast Main Line, and yet there's all sorts of, you still basically a manual railway with brick wall signalling principles. How are you suddenly going to get lots more trains per hour or lots more capacity through that railway is really the essence of the question.
Yes, I'm absolutely right.
I mean, fundamentally, really quickly, is that when you move away from the multiple aspect signaling, which is fixed into the infrastructure, and you flip it on its head, and you then have continuous communication with the train, and you're designing, you can now break to the train's capabilities. You unlock system capacity pretty much as far as physically possible. On a 125 railway, you might get 2.5 minute headway type thing. It's getting a bit technical, but so the point there is how you then utilize that depends on what's being sought. You want more trains, you want trains to stop at various places more often, you want more higher speed, you want higher performance, but it provides more capability. The reason why it's harder to answer when you're doing a systemic change for a very complex railway, well, what am I going to get in 3-4 years time at 3 o'clock in the afternoon? Well, it depends what timetable is desired, and that depends on so many things. What service do you want? Which is a bit different, say, a metro line railway where you have just a single tube and you're back and forth, and you can say, I'm going to deliver a railway that achieves X trains per hour because they all just come one after the other. But we've resisted that because really it depends on what stakeholders want from the railway. It could be, more stopping services, more high speed services, and so on. But you unlock the underpinning system capacity, which then you can do various things with.
Thank you, Chief Vic, and thank you to Neil for developing the question, and thank you to Paul for answering it. So I'm hoping this now means we don't have autumn timetables in future when we have these new timetables, because the new system will help us cope. My colleague to my left, I'm in RIA today, and I've been very welcome here. It's been very nice to be here in RIA, and David even bought me a sandwich, which is unusual. That was very kind. So David's been very patient, but also David has been working with his colleagues, Carl and others, on a summary which looks a bit like this. You can't read that, but you don't need to read it because it's in your email. And I'm just going to give David a couple of minutes to tell us, you're a bit more detached from this, David, and I know you believe in it, but just give us your take on all of this.
Well, yeah, thanks, Neil. I mean, a few months back, TUFIC asked us to undertake an independent lessons learned exercise looking at the early stages of ECDP. And I think this is something that we probably want to work with TUFIC and repeat at an appropriate interval, because, it'd be fair to say the project's at its early stages. There's quite a lot of good lessons coming out, but clearly more will be learned as we go along. So my colleagues Alexis King and Carl King, no relation, have been interviewing, they've interviewed all people we've spoken to today, but also a number of their colleagues, both within the programme and adjacent to the programme. And we'll shortly be publishing the findings. But what we've distilled it down into is 6 key takeaways. And I think the listeners will recognise many of these things in what the panel have been saying. So the first one is a different approach is needed. As several speakers have said, this is a transformational change programme. It's about changing the way we operate the railway, but it's only enabled by technology. So it's, we need to move away from our traditional technology focus into thinking about this as a change programme. And we need to think about, and this is going to GBR, we need to think about the whole thing as part of a railway business, an integrated business. And that leads neatly into the second finding, which has been quite heavily talked about user-centricity. Really understanding the operators and their ability to identify the needs of the passenger, and that's absolutely central to the plan. You've heard some really good examples of that. In other parts of the forest, as we talk about understanding what the client's outcomes are. Rather than the client giving us a detailed specification, tell us what we're trying to achieve. Well, this is the worked example of doing that. And Mark Ferrer illustrated that well with his analogy of thinking he completely understood the operation, but then really finding out there was a gap and how he filled that. And likewise, Paul, with his point about demystification and all the work that he's done with simulation and so forth, which, notwithstanding the point about the difference between simulation and actuality, I think the work that LNER have done with simulators has been really powerful, both to understand for their business the benefits, ultimately for their passengers, but also in terms of onboarding the drivers and other stakeholders. Third point is we see that the key word here is partnership, and I think you've probably heard through the discussion that this is much more of a partnership than we tend to see in the industry. The industry, sadly, has tended to be characterized by transactional and confrontational sort of arrangements. Mm-hmm. And I have a view that the client gets the supplier behavior that they deserve, and vice versa. And this is an example of getting the supplier behavior that you deserve by putting out a partnership ethos, importantly with a shared vision, jointly defined principles, really understanding what makes it work for everybody. And I think the thing we could almost add to that, which is part of what we're talking about today, about being a learning organisation or a learning partnership, not thinking that we know all the answers, which is one of the points you were making. And I think the fourth point is that doing this unleashes the power of the supply chain. Supplier and client are in lockstep, and they're both responsible for delivering the project in partnership, but they're using the right skill sets. The client isn't trying to do what the partner, what the supplier is best able to do, and vice versa. And I think that's tremendously important. One of the things quite a lot of the interviewees said is this ain't easy. Yeah, it's not easy. It takes a lot of hard work and commitment, and there's a learning curve, quite a steep learning curve. And there was a number of examples which, when we publish it, you'll see them in the report. But there was a recognition that we're changing. We're changing the way we work. We're changing the technology. It's not easy, and it won't necessarily. I think Mark Ferrer might have said this. It won't necessarily all work perfectly the first time. That's why you need to be a learning organisation. And that leads neatly into the last point, which is really what we're about today. The last point is communicate, communicate, communicate. And that's both within the team, as you've heard has been going on, but also with across the industry. Because to the extent we heard any sort of slight skepticism, it was from people adjacent to or outside the project. Those within the project were very positive, and whatever difficulties they might be having, they could see a way forward, and they could see it was moving in the right direction. Those looking in from outside were less clear. So I think it's really important, and I think there's the potential that this becomes the default model for complex programs in the industry. And I'm not saying complex ETCS or signaling programs, I'm saying complex programs of whatever sort. And therefore we need to get that lesson out across the industry. So we'll be publishing that soon. You've got the one-page version of it. Imminently, very soon, as a minister might say, but probably sooner than they mean.
Yeah, I hope so. David, thank you. Thank you very much for that. And a very useful summary. And of course, everybody that's on this call will receive a copy directly. So watch out for that. Your last point particularly struck me, that this is a template for other any complex program, or most or many complex programs. We could use electrification in there, couldn't we? We could use significant upgrades. And you also said in that same point the importance of communication, and all the panelists have commented on it, and Paul particularly. So it strikes me that communication skills are going to be a new, let me be cheeky and say a new core skill for engineers and senior ops people going forward. If I'm right, because that seems to be what you're saying, are those engineers and senior ops people ready for this focus on communication?
I think that's a fair challenge, but you've heard today that we've got a whole panel of advocates, and we've heard from Paul. He's got driver advocates. I know from having met many of the two Mark's colleagues that there's advocacy within their teams, and I know likewise Tufik has I go as far as say evangelists in the team. So I think it's more a case of you try holding them back.
Good, thank you. That's very encouraging. And the model of communication here has been quite an interesting one, because it's been very much show, show, not tell, show first, and then keep showing, and then tell, and then keep showing. So that there's also the thing of keeping, just not giving up as well. So that tenacity point has been absolutely fundamental as well. Okay, so thank you to David and the RIA team for your work there. That we look forward to that and to sharing that more widely. Just last chance for any comments or questions from the audience before I ask Tufik just to say a couple of words to finish off, and then I'll sum up. Okay, put them in the chat, or we'll collect them afterwards anyway. We are today competing with Prime Minister's questions and the Rail Freight Group lunch. So thank you again to everybody for joining us. These are different attractions with different things to them. But thank you all for joining us. So Tufik, just in 2 minutes, where does that leave us? Have we crossed the Rubicon?
So, your point on communication. So the underpinnings of the approach has been to educate, and that's not to be meant in a patronizing way. That's to be meant in a way that if something's not clear, we're not communicating it clearly. Rather than saying, well, we wrote a paper, they rejected it, so that's it. We're going to lose this, once in a generation opportunity. So we've worked hard on how do we get under the skin of this and get, bring people in to really understand the benefits of this. But what we're really dealing with here is something that started with being about signaling. It was an issue of signaling renewals, asset choice. And then it became about, actually, this is about how we run the railway, and therefore it's about change, and it's about improving how we run the railway and so on. But actually, it's become even more profound than that. It's really become about setting the journey for the next generation railway. And while train control isn't everything, and we don't want to pretend it is fundamental. It's kind of at the heart of how we run the railway. But more importantly, it's the next generation in that going through the first phase of East Coast Digital if you fast forward 3-5 years and just imagine that condition, that reality unfolding, it really starts to change our industry. It creates a catalyst for the migration to in-cab signaling. But more importantly, the way this has happened has become, kind of more importantly, the way, the approach, the model, the partnership, the user centricity, the change, the innovation, the open boundary working, which in a post-Williams-Schaap intent heading to that direction becomes fundamental for the success of this industry. This industry faces some incredible headwinds, not in the very limited view of other modes, but in the quite seismic challenge of technology, the future of telecommunications, hybrid working, and just the fact that we will have another generation or two coming into the workplace with a very different perspective on life, different expectations. And if the user and user experience environment isn't front and center, then yep, for some, they might begrudgingly use the infrastructure they're forced to use. But humans are phenomenally inventive and will avoid pain and will continue to adapt and evolve away from the things we dislike. And this industry will diminish. I mean, it might sound very grand and philosophical and dramatic, but if you just tap into where the next wave of change is coming, no one would have thought we could have done this the way we're doing it now, just 2 years ago. So the railway needs to offer a much more compelling proposition, and this thing in itself as a technology step change is a big enabler of that, more productive, more capable, less cost, so on. But actually proving that we can work in this way despite the complexities of this industry, in the need to operate in a much more harmonious, unified way across the industry, but even with the value that supply organizations and manufacturers and consulting organizations can offer, is absolutely fundamental to the future. And if we don't move into this more strategic, longer term, user-centric, partnered, not because it's a sexy term, but because it's about relationships and getting value out of relationships, then the industry will be in for a very painful demise. But actually, this shows what is possible. In a conversation I had with Keith Williams just a few weeks ago, actually, he says that a lot is made out of the Williams-Schaap review around structures. Everyone's obsessed with structures. The moment he started, everyone wanted to know what the structures would be, and ever since he's finished, everyone wants to know what the structures will be. And he said something like, the biggest change we can have is making ticketing easier. It's like, if we can make the ticketing experience easier, it will change the railway. And just talking about what we've done on this, he said, and this is a prime example of how, yes, we can make structures easier, and yes, we do need to. And there are areas, very obvious areas, but actually a lot of it comes down to the leadership to transcend the structures, because however you slice and dice the industry, there will be some complexity.
Yeah, and there will always be a supply chain. And the nice news, so we've got two threats really. We'll lose passengers or we'll lose investment. And that's where Mark was as well, in terms of his, the size of the market. So either the railway is going to get smaller or we do something. That's the reality. And I agree with that slightly serious projection. But, I think the future is here now. And what we've seen today is one of the few things that I have seen that gives me hope that those challenges will be addressed. And I think that the good news for GBR and whoever's in charge of the structure is that one of the big messages for today is the broader message from the rail sector deal, which is that it's easier if you let the supply chain do some of the hard work. And I know behind the scenes, have fought tirelessly to allow that to happen, because there are many processes, I'm not going to say structures, I'm going to say processes that make it hard for the client to really trust and share risk with the supply chain. And in our productivity work, we found that actually clients kid themselves on risk. They think they're transferring risk, but they're not. And there's a whole range of examples we've got of that. Also, in our work on productivity that led to TIES and the TIES Living Lab project, we found there were 6 things you need to do to drive productivity, 6 main areas that have worked in other sectors. And I think we've talked about 5 of the 6 today in this. So in terms of my benchmark for maturity of a program in terms of productivity, this has scored well.
So what's the 6th we need to think about?
It was touched on. Actually, it's in the people space. Okay, so there's 2. The one we haven't really talked about is there's 2 aspects to the people bit. So there's 2 of the 6 are about people. One is about preparing our existing workforce for the new technical challenge. And Mark spoke very well, Mark F spoke very well on that. The other aspect of that is we're short of people. And the supply chain produced their initial pay review data last week. It's a confidential document, so I can't share it, but I can tell you that signalling was the highest of the wage inflation risks. So the thing that's been missing is the topic for a different one, I think, which is how do we get the next generation of engineers, the next generation of operators, the next generation of drivers, because what the wage inflation comes from is a shortage of skills.
So what the wage inflation, what the shortage of skills comes from is the other part of the sector deal, which is lack of continuity of pipeline has meant that people haven't invested in skills, and wind the clock forward a number of years, we find ourselves where we are now, where there's a shortage of skills.
Yeah.
So if the sector deal can produce the pipeline, and we have one, it's called a long-term deployment plan, if we can make that real, then the supply chain will have a justification for addressing that problem.
Yeah, it's about confidence, isn't it, in the supply chain? And we've seen a supply chain here that have invested in this program. So something has given them confidence to do that, and it's very impressive.
And actually, Neil, just to say, there's something important there. The point about, so we've actually onboarded partners while still carrying a lot of uncertainty on this program. There might be kind of an external projection of momentum, but we've been going through years of business casing and gating this program through phases. I think really excessively, actually. You know, the industry's kind of gone way too far on the other end that it's very hard to do anything strategic now. But we've onboarded partners and had to take them through quite an ambiguous journey. And, you know, on the edges had folks who kind of don't believe it's going to happen, you know, we'll come along and see. But, you know, some of the people that you see on the screen here have been deeply embedded on this journey, making it happen. Invested in making it happen, rather than just saying, well, here's a pipeline for 10 years and therefore that's all you need. The thing that I find really perplexing, which is why I'm so passionate about how we can do things correctly, is when you take the long view and you zoom out, this industry spends billions and billions. And yet when you zoom right in, we're agonizing and struggling, and we don't have certainty and we're not sure and all that. And we can actually zoom out and see that there's been decades of billions, and there'll be decades to come, regardless of some of the pressures I discussed. And if we can engage in a different way that invests in the longevity of the relationships to achieve the outcomes we want for the industry, we can navigate that ambiguity. Because nobody's going to write a blank check for decades. I mean, even major enterprises like HS2, you know, go through their reviews and their struggles and so on. But there is a way to create more clarity of intent and directionality and alignment to outcomes, and bringing in value generators into that journey. So anyway, it could take it down a whole rabbit hole, but I wanted to emphasize once again how truly matters.
Yeah, no, that's right. It's leadership as well. You talked about goodwill earlier, Tufik, but actually what you're talking about there is leadership. There's just a couple of minutes left. I'm going to ask the panel if anybody wants to make any last points or comments. So Paul, Mark.
Yeah, Neil, if I could just make a point, just building on some of that, you know, last discussion, because it was something I reflected on with the ASLEF group last time we met, and what we are creating, is new apprentices. So for example, there's an uplift in drivers for East Coast Main Line that will be all apprentice drivers. They will become the generation of drivers that were recruited purely to deliver ETCS. So I reflected on, like my own example was when my cohort were recruited, it was to deliver high-speed trains and the electrification on the East Coast Main Line. And that real advocacy with owning that transformation was, I saw that in like my peer group. And I think we'll see the same again with ETCS. They will be the ETCS generation, and they've all been brought into the industry to help us deliver it, and they'll own it and take it forward. And we'll see it in signalling, we'll see it in the maintainers of the onboard systems. And I think, I think this is the exciting thing. And I will touch on where we are. You're really operating outside of East Coast as well. So, for example, for the onboard system for AT300, as part of that design review group, I've got Avanti West Coast, I've got East Midlands Railway, I've got Transpennine Express.
Yeah.
Us working together to make life as simple as possible for us as operators and as for Hitachi as a supplier. So again, there's a lot of other things happening, activities such as that is being felt outside of East Coast as well.
Yes, you're taking it to the wider operator community.
Yeah,
I know we've mentioned the tube and the benefits seen there, and you've also mentioned GTR and that service has been transformed. It's just amazing now the difference in that service that GTR are running there. Right, thank you, Paul. Thank you, Mark and Mark. Thank you, Tufik, and thank you, David, for a view into the future. And a big thank you to our audience. Thank you for your questions. I'm going to leave the last word to Neil, who says, good news, the new train drivers will be apprentices. And here. Thank you, Neil. You couldn't have said, I would have wanted to say that myself, but you beat me to it. So anyway, thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of the day, and stay with our program of Lunch and Learn, because it's always handy to see what the future brings. And in the meantime, thank you, everyone, for all your efforts, and watch out for the paper. Thank you.